Here we go. Well, welcome everyone to day 3 of the nonprofit boot camp around grant writing for federal funding. Annalena Kazikas here with the Wallace Center and Food Systems Leadership Network. Very excited to have been able to bring this training to y'all and to be working together in partnership with Una Van Duvall and Margaret Krome to deliver this training. All sessions have been recorded, and so we'll get those out to you early next week if you haven't been able to attend all 3. So we are recording the Zoom webinar. Please continue to use that chat box to talk to each other, to ask some questions, and to connect. The Q&A box also on the bottom of your toolbar separates out the questions. So if you have a specific question to the panelists, please do use that. We found that the raising the hand option is great for Zoom meetings, not super great for the Zoom webinars. So we see your hand raised, but please try and, if possible, to use the chat box or Q&A when possible. It's just easier to get to you that way. So thanks for the little housekeeping there. And again, to those of you who are a little bit newer to the Food Systems Leadership Network, welcome. Thank you for being here. The FSLN is a national peer learning community of people and organizations from across the country that are all working towards more just, equitable, and sustainable food systems. We create opportunities for leaders to come together, to meet each other, to learn together, and to work together through a variety of different training programs and mentorship programs, topical calls, and different peer connection opportunities. One such of those training opportunities is this nonprofit boot camp that Una and Margaret have been delivering and will be in the last session of today. So quick intro to Margaret and Una. Margaret Krome is the policy director with Michael Field's Agricultural Institute, and Una Van Duvall is president of the board of directors for Odessa School of Fashion, the chairperson of fundraising for the Nicodemus Homecoming Committee, communications director for Wisconsin State Conference of the NAACP, and city and state contractor. So lots of tremendous wisdom in the house today, and it has been over the last several days. So I am going to wrap up this intro and hand it over to you ladies to get us kicked off for the final day here.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to get my screen up. Give me half a second. I just have to talk to it nicely. I guess I haven't talked with it quite nicely enough. There we go.
I saw this ski in the morning and surf in the afternoon. I'm so jealous of you people in Hawaii. Stop messing with us.
It's hard.
And contrary to my intro, I can keep a job. Some of these things overlap, just so you know.
So Una and I have really enjoyed working with the Wallace Center, and thank you, Annalena and Andrew, and also to Susan, who isn't on with us, but has been just a terrific supporter. Just a quick reiteration of what we've done, where we're headed. This is a 3-day workshop, all recorded. Designing sound project started us off. Yesterday was identifying possible funding. Today is basics of grant writing. And here, I'm not going to go through this. I went through it yesterday, a quick review from day 1. You can take a look. It'll be on this recording when you get it, so you can always go back and review that. Day 2, yesterday, we went through several pieces related to identifying possible funding. We spent a bit of time saying, how do you figure out what's out there? We're casting out the net. And we went through a number of possibilities, including a couple of guides, one of which you either have in hand or you've got the website for, and we'll remind you again what that is. And this is the guide of which I'm speaking. Also, there's a really excellent guide that you were introduced to yesterday.
Margaret, I got to interrupt you.
Yeah.
Okay, someone says they don't have sound. Let's make sure that people can hear what you're saying.
Okay.
Michael, is it you? Or does everybody have sound? If you have sound, give us a little, they can hear. Yeah. So Michael, I want you to check your sound on your computer, please. It's probably not us. But thanks, Margaret. I just want to make sure.
Thank you. No, that's great. Super. That's really smart.
Oh, he's got it back. Great. Okay.
Okay, great. So we were just saying, yesterday, we spent time looking at how do you identify possible funding. First, looking out how do you figure out what possibilities are out there, casting out the net, several possibilities, including this guide we went through a little bit more in detail, and the National Sustainable Ag Coalition's guide to federal farm programs, and that's on their website under publications. Culling was the next step. Like after you've looked at all these possibilities, you can't do them all. So how do you figure out what program might be suitable for your purposes, or more than one program, and pieces of your project might be suited by different pieces of other people, of other programs? So you went through a bunch of questions, especially focusing on whether the purposes of your grant advance the purposes of the program. Can you literally make a case, a good and compelling case, that what you say you're going to do is going to advance that program's purposes? A number of other things: eligibility, restrictions on uses of dollars. Does that kind of assistance meet your needs? Is the size of it right? Does it have matching requirements that work for you? Is it something that in advance, you're going to only get paid by this grant on a reimbursement basis? You have to have money up front to move it. You have to find out if that's true. Every program is different. What are the timelines or the deadlines? How long can the grants go? And also, is it a hassle? With people who have worked with this grant program before, is it a nuisance? Is it a really great, easy to work with program? So answering those questions, the single easiest, best place to get most of that information is through the request for proposals. The RFP goes by many other names. Also, the webinars that many programs now offer to help give you information about programs. Don't feel shy about calling the program staff. A lot of what I do is going through networks and talking to past grantees. We went through how do you use the Building Better Places guide. We won't do that again today, but we hope that if you use it, you can give a shout out in your head to our friend and colleague, Donnell Richards, who went to the trouble this year to put in some additional little indicators on the margins of the page that would be able to say to you, hey, this is pretty useful for you if you're a farmer. This might be useful for you if you're an institution. This might be helpful for you if you're looking for loans, and so on. He has these nice little symbols there. So on we go. Today, basics of grant writing. And we're going to go over a number of things: basic sound practices, a few things to avoid, some commonly requested attachments, and what kind of resources and help might be out there. So, you jump in.
Okay. The first basic grant writing, and thank you. And I also want to say hi to Darnell and Susan, who have been great with us. And we just love working with them. So the first thing I want you to do is get organized. Now, today you've come to this call or this Zoom knowing what you might want to write for, even if it's hypothetical, and who you may want to write to, even if that is hypothetical, because the components will work. So now you would get organized. If you know who you're going to write to, you know the organization or the program that you want to write for. And it's time to start looking at what they require. Again, I'm doing this section because I need you to know you need more time than you could ever imagine. So don't let your idea that this is simple, that it's only 4 or 5 pages, or that this is going to happen. Allow time. You're going to need more time than you expect. Read that RFP not once, not twice, but 3 times. The first time I call it the 360 helicopter view, where you kind of zoom in and kind of look at it from the big picture. And then every time you read it after that, and allow some time in between your readings, and come back to it and really look at the components independent and then as they overlap. So use the outline, what I want to accomplish. How do we want to handle our dollars? What are we doing to make this program really meet the need of the agency that we're applying to? Let me repeat that. How does this program meet the need of the agency we're applying to? That's the compatibility thing. You're not just getting money for you, you're helping the funder or whoever is investing in you advance their agenda as well. So just remember that. That's keeping it logical. Break your work into sections. This is where I say, make a note, this is not linear. I tell first-time grant writers, kind of start with a budget sketch. It may not be the final budget, but it will start helping you think of this in a way, because let's face it, at the end of the day, this is about some type of monetary activity. So your budget is very important. You may not stick to what you originally thought. It may shape as you get your narrative together. You may look and say, oh, this is all they'll cover. Some of these things won't match, some of them will. But just use that thing as a kind of way to get started and keeping you grounded in the rules and regulations that each funder or agency would have. Use RFP checklists. You know, we have one. Will you advance that slide? We have one that will show you to give you a little way. You don't use something like this. This is a great where she sees proposal components, the cover letter, the project summary, project objectives and outcomes. Now, by today, none of these terms should be foreign to you. You should kind of now know what they kind of mean and how they're going to work. Background, rationale, and need. What are you accomplishing? What are you trying to do? Approach and methods. How are you going to accomplish that? Outputs. That's again what some of the outcomes are going to be. Outreach. How are you going to talk to people about this? What are you going to do? Who do you need to recruit? Your evaluation plan. Now, this is where a lot of funders will tell you some of the evaluation measures that they're going to look for. Sometimes they're going to say, we want you to be able to track this or something along that line. But you need to know that there is going to be an evaluation measure at the end of this. Margaret, you want to talk about the logic model if they have some, particularly for firms?
Sure. Many programs do ask you to do a logic model, and they will often give you a template that you could use that just basically a way of logically walking through in a chart format what it's going to look like. What are the inputs to your project? What are the outputs from your project? What are the activities of your project? What's your timeline? If you notice in the left-hand margin, there are different colors. The reason for that is these all once upon a time were red because we didn't have them accomplished yet. And so the ones that are still red here, those are the ones that haven't been done yet. The ones that are yellow are the ones that are in process. The ones that are green, they've been done, yahoo. And we have under the who category here, this is where I just put in who are my collaborators, who's agreed to do what's the date when they're going to get it done, any notes that they need to write in here so the rest of the team can kind of follow it. It's just an easy way. I like to put in a word count because when you write proposals, increasingly they're done online and they have very strict word counts where your text just gets cut off, boom, if you're not brief enough. So it's kind of good to know at the front end. Usually I write those things ahead of time in a Word document and then I import it, but I have to know how many words I'm allowed. One small point, make sure when you do that you've read carefully, are they doing it in characters like A, B, C, D, or in words? And if they're doing characters, are they counting the space in between? Sometimes you really want to know that you've got the correct metric there. So anyway, that's what that category refers to.
Thanks. I was going to get that in because so any chart, any way that you start to organize is great, perfect. And that knowing how they're counting the characters is very important as well. And these are things that will either count against your proposal, or in some cases, if competition is really rough, at least in the private sector, it disqualifies you. So don't take it lightly and pay very close attention to those things. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
Let me see, how are we doing? You guys, everybody understand that? I'm checking the chat.
Yeah, I just checked the chat. I was just checking the chat.
Oh, you were? Okay.
Good. Okay.
We're trying to make sure we keep up. Okay. Is this me clear?
This is me. And so fundamentally, it's be clear. That should be straightforward. Use simple language. One time I was doing this workshop down in Louisiana and a gentleman said to me, I really like big words. And so I asked the group, how do you feel about big words? And they went, no. Simple language. Don't use an acronym unless you've defined it, and don't use it unless you must. Clear, simple language. Don't assume that people know things that you haven't already explained. And again, as Una already said, explain how your proposal advances the program's goals. Be precise, be accurate, don't exaggerate. And I find it's often helpful if I'm working with a team of collaborators, work on that proposal together, and that's when that chart that just walked you through is really helpful. It means everybody's doing their piece, they know what they're supposed to do, it's clear, and everybody's held accountable for when they're supposed to get their things in. I love having a person review a proposal for whether it's clear, whether it's logical. Some people feel really squeamish about writing and they want somebody to review it to make sure that the writing is good. That's fine. But if you do any of that, having somebody review it ahead, give yourself enough time. Nothing worse than having somebody come in a few days before and say, please turn this around. And I've had that request, and the things that needed to be done were quite fundamental. They didn't begin to have the time to change it. So give your reviewers the respect of giving them time if you want to have it. Be sure your budget is accurate, clear, and accompanied by a budget narrative. We'll get to that in a minute. Next. This is you, Ms. Van
Is
Duvall.
it strategy? Okay, let's talk about this. And someone in the chat said, yes, sometimes when we talk about characters, both the font and the font size could be specified. That was a great point. Thanks for saying that. You guys should all be looking at the chats as well, because there's a lot of good information. We're just taking you through this as quickly as we can. So let me talk about being strategic. Number one, most proposals will ask for some type of support letter. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, except that if you're working with a short timeline and you're asking people to put together a letter of support for you that you have to get in, upload it, and get all your other things done, it can get very daunting. So one of the things that I'm going to offer is that if you are writing enough grants, start to collect snippets of comments and praise and things from people that you typically would use. And then you have something that you can start to work with them on. And I say, we don't want cookie cutter support letters. We want them to be unique for the program, sometimes unique for your project. So people that you've been working with, be very strategic about why you get the support letter from them and what you want them to say about your project or your organization. So you want to have I say a bench of those, or people that you can call on for different support letters. The other thing is, look and see how those agencies or programs will do the review of the grant that you're submitting, because it may inform you as to what language you want to use, how you want it to go in, and how they will evaluate. I know that in some development projects, they actually score land to see how well the land would do if you had to build on it. And so you might want to have some indication of how your proposal will be reviewed. And finally, get your ego out of it and ask someone to help you look at the proposal and show you where there's soft spots, improvements can be made, or answers are not as clear to them as they are to you. And give yourselves time to rework it. I'm a Grammarly user. I can think up things, but I'm terrible at grammar. And anybody who knows me knows I can't spell. That's why my mother only put 3 letters in my name. So what I use is something that helps me understand my grammar, that helps me understand there's another way to look at it. And I really use those tools, and thank goodness for those things, because because you really do need that support. And don't get upset if someone tells you, this is not really making sense to me. Take the time. You have good people around you, the collaborators. Take the time to help them understand what you're trying to say. Don't get your frustration up. Take a deep breath. You know when it's getting next to you. And it can be very stressful when you're under deadline. You're trying to get all these things done, get budget, support letters, get signed up, get the upload. But be strategic enough to give yourself a chance to get those narratives in place. Now, as you start to write more and more grants, you will develop a rhythm. You'll know whether you want to do the budget first, do your narrative first, do your outline first, start your support letters. I'm not going to be able to tell you what's going to work best for you, but I am going to say that at some point, all those things have to come together. And the only tip I can give you is allow as much time as humanly possible for you to do it. And just know, and you have to tell everybody, I'm not going out to dinner. I'm not going to go hang at the, really, you're going to have to really make a commitment to write and get it done. And people may not understand why you're working from home. What do you mean you can't come? Well, I got a deadline. And you're kind of like a reporter at that point. Did I miss something, Margaret?
That was perfect. Absolutely. One thing that I often do when I'm doing those letters of support, I say to the person of whom I'm asking it. Two things. Would you like me to write some thinking points for you for your letter of support, or would you like me to just to draft it and you can put it back and, you know, adjust it to be in your own voice? That's one thing. And almost always people are glad to have me draft it. And also a strong letter of support is one where they articulate commitment, not just, this is a great thing, love it, love it, love it, but it's a great thing, love it, love it. And here's what I'm going to contribute. So just keep in mind a strong letter of support includes commitment. So on to some details, and a good proposal has paid attention to those details.
And before you start, let me just say that Lynn just put in one good thing. Also leave time for board approvals and things that may need to be calendared if in an organization. And we didn't touch on that, so I just wanted to get that in.
Good
That's
point. Really great. Love it. Thank you. So just don't get creative with the format. If there is a format explicit, and some proposals are really explicit. Used to be when there were when they were more send it in by mail and less do it online, the format mattered more, but it's still a case. There are a lot of proposals where you still have to think through format. So make sure you do what they tell you to do. If it says 1-inch margin, stick with that. And if it's 12-point font, stick with that. Single space, whatever it is, just do it. Matching funds, named partners, get that all lined up. And I think you did a nice job already talking about that, so I won't reiterate on that any further. Be willing to readjust your proposal. So if you've written a proposal for program X, and even you don't yet know if it's going to get funded or it's not, or maybe you've already been turned down, you can absolutely submit it to another. The people will almost always ask me this question, so I'm just going to answer it in advance. You may know nothing in the world wrong with your submitting a proposal twice, you know, to two different agencies. What you can't do is accept money from more than one source for exactly the same work in exactly the same place and exactly the same time, unless it is explicitly delineated that you are going to be using match from one to accommodate the other. But what you can do is, for example, if you ended up getting money from more than one agency, you absolutely could work to negotiate with them and say, well, we'll use your money for year one and this other for year two, or we'll use yours for this area of land and for this geography and that for this other geography, or whatever. You can come up and demonstrate complementarity. But the smart thing to do is to just make sure, if you've already put in a proposal, that you don't think of it as a cassette to go, or CD player. You don't take that CD and just stick it back into the player. It's different for every program. Every program you have to really look at their RFP individually. There will undoubtedly be pieces of the logic or of the language you can use again, but readjust it. And then remember the deadline. The heartbreak of our lives was a few years ago when we had not one, not two, but at least 3 organizations here in the state of Wisconsin who had submitted to the Beginning Farmer Rancher Development Grant Program. And I heard from 3 programs that they had a jam electronically in submission, and they did not get submitted in time. They didn't do it in advance of the deadline, and they got stuck in an electronic queue and didn't get in.
Let me chime in right there, because looking at the deadline is not just the date, it is also the time. Because I have done NEA, I'm in California or Wisconsin or Colorado, and the grant is going to New York or DC. So you want to make sure. Now, my rule of thumb is that if the deadline for my grant is November 10th or 11th, I sent it on the 10th, because being on time is actually being early. Because if you're getting caught up in that electronic queue, I've had people close their portal. If they say 12 midnight, they don't mean 12:01, they mean 12. So that deadline also needs to include the time. I know some of you are really advanced grant writers, I can tell by your chat, and you've been doing this a while. And thank you for those great comments that we might have skipped over. And we'll read them up for other people that may not know. But keep in mind that every grant and every grant experience is going to be different. I've had people get right to the door and didn't get that timestamp. So I think that you do want to give yourselves plenty of time.
Great, thank you. Anything else that you wanted to say in here? I think this is, you pretty well covered it with.
We covered
all
it
the other electronic.
yesterday.
Good,
Yep.
super.
And
I
you
did
got
see
those
that.
grants back up or Sam back
So,
up? Great. Oh, you put in
we
a
are
sample. Look at there.
talking budgets for just a minute here now. Every grant proposal, and you all should have received one of your handouts deals with budgets. So I'm just going to do a quick once over here, but there are a few things to point out. And that is there are fundamentally two kinds of budgets. And the person who does policy, there's sometimes an additional one, which is I sometimes have to tell funders, not federal funders, but just foundations, what percentage of my budget might be pertinent to lobbying. But fundamentally for most grants, they'll ask you some version of the following. They'll ask you to explain your project by objectives. And sometimes that will be true for most federal grants. You have to explain kind of the big idea chunks, and they have an actual form which allows you to do that. And then you walk through and you say, for the money that I'm going to be doing on this project objective here, the conduct fact finding, well, the federal, we're asking for $7,100, and we're matching it with this much cash and this much in-kind match for the non-federal match, and woo, the whole thing for that objective is $18,650. You go walking down through the different project objectives, and at the bottom, you can say, oh, we are asking $38,750 from the federal government, and the things that we are contributing in our non-federal match are X amount and X amount, and to equal, voila. And the total match that this particular example has is $38,750. It's a one-to-one match. So that's that kind of a budget. The next budget pertains to your actual expenses. That's an expense budget. And just before we even obviously go through it, note that at the very bottom there, it has to add up to the same. It's just you're taking that budget and breaking it in a different way. So it's, again, $38,750 in what you're asking for, and $38,750 in cash and match, but it's broken out more in a different way by personnel, by fringe benefits, by travel, and whatever other expenses you've got. Any good budget, really, it's smart to include a budget narrative. It's almost always asked for these days, not always, but usually it is. Be sure to describe and justify each budget expense, list the sources of match, explain anything in the budget that you think might not be obvious to the reviewer. And why is this not moving forward when I think I've asked it to move forward? Sorry. And here we're going to jump into a few things to avoid. And you and I are going to do this together. You may jump and I will jump too. Just you get started and I'll come in.
Well, again, in that narrative, be precise and be able to really point to succinct activities that you have been really good at, that give you the experience to take on the project and ask for the supporting. I think that when people kind of exaggerate a little bit or they inflate their numbers, reviewers can shake that out sometimes. And believe it or not, that sometimes the same questions are asked in different ways. And don't assume that the expectation of one program will be this, they won't be the same. So you want to be sure that you want to be sure. So if you don't think ask. We do have some electronic programs, but every program is different. So you'll get a handle. I'm answering a question in the chat. Mm-hmm. Just remember that you can always call the agency or the funder to see what their expectations are. Margaret and I have said to you, find out early and get on those webinars, send emails. There's someone that can help you through it. And last but not least, you can check around your network on a call like today and see who's applied for this thing before. You can always usually go to the organization or the department's website to see who's being funded currently. And you might be able to reach out to them if they're in the next city or they're not too far away. Just try and reach out and see if they'll tell you. Don't be discouraged. I said it yesterday. It takes 1 to 2 to 3 times before something, even if it's the same grant, is generally funded. Come on, Margaret, what else we got there?
Just one thing back to the first point about don't include materials that aren't requested. When I have done grant reviews, and when they used to get sent to me in the mail as opposed to electronically, you could really see it. There would be those proposals that would come in that were the typical, let's call it 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 an inch. And then there'd be that one that would come in, it was like an inch thick, and I'd be, ugh. I did not look at it and think, oh, they must be wonderful. They must be very thorough. They must be the best. I looked at it and thought, oh, brother. And so just recognize that the call for proposals will tell you what it wants. And if you have questions about whether something makes sense to include, call the program staff, but don't just gratuitously send in an extra report that didn't get requested, because the reviewer doesn't look upon that as appreciation. They think, I've got to go to my kid's soccer game, or I was looking they don't think of that as a bonus. So
no, they also may think that you're not really following the directions.
Yes, exactly.
So I that do not include, now you sometimes now electronic uploads, you can't put it in. So you can't do it anymore. But the ones that we still get sometimes in the mail or materials are added. Do not think that you're helping yourself by sending stuff that the reviewers are going to not read, and open yourself up for questions that are not asked. That's the other thing.
Exactly. True. So this is just a quick summary. This is typical what most grant applications are going to want to find out one way and another. Fundamentally, it's what a lot of you all did the other night when you did your project quick one-page project plan. When you went through, it's the summary. What are you going to do and why are you going to do it? What's the need? What are the goals and objectives? Approach and method or work plan, timeline, organizational mission. Tell the story. Why are you a great person to fund it? To do this thing. Personnel credentials, key staff, skills, whatever's, experience. The budget. And again, is this a budget by expense category, by objectives? What non-federal match can you contribute? Use a budget narrative to clarify the details. To whom and with whom and how will you communicate about your work? And then how are you going to measure success? Basics, those are very common. There may be a few extras here and there, but those are classic ones you're going to be asked for. You want to do attachments here, just some of the common things that people are going to be asking to have you submit.
Yeah, I was going to say, thank you, Margaret. I was going to say too, that in some instances with the budget, if you are showing your staff, they may ask you to break out the percentage of effort that this grant will pay that staff, and if they're not being paid, it's a little in the weeds, but I need you to know that sometimes the staff may be 50-50, they may be 100%. So you'll have to think about that and make sure that you're very clear about how that translates into dollars. We can't talk enough about the letters of support. And again, you want to develop a bench of great supporters that can write. How about this? Organizations of officers and directors. Make sure, one, that you're very clear, and make sure that all of your media lines up. Because sometimes when I'm reviewing grants, the first thing I do is go to the website. And I want to make sure that that website is current and that the names that they're giving me on the documents are the names that are there. Because if not, I don't know if I've got a real approved grant or not. So there are times, I know that I work with a couple of state groups here with the state of Wisconsin. They troll your social media now. So you want to be mindful that you want things to check out across the board if you're listing things publicly, and now everything is public because it's all on social media. Your income and expense statements for your fiscal year, sometimes known as your 990, or something that is on file. Trust me, most funders and agencies have staff that do due diligence. They make sure that you are in compliance. And anybody who knows me knows that I will shut a project down if it is not in fiscal compliance, or if there's something that we think is not quite clear. That is the quickest death to a grant, is that there be something, that financial documents that are out of order, something that you didn't quite get right. So pay very close attention to that. Yep, that's great. The organizations, people are sending chats up over my slides, so I gotta take a look. I can't read it. It's okay. The organization projected income and expenses. So let me talk about this too, is that you're gonna have a project budget, and in some cases, the grant will want to see the organizational budget. How solid are you? How's your audits? Sometimes they want to see what you've done and how strong your organization is, particularly when it's a multi-year grant. They want to make sure that you're fiscally sound enough to get those reimbursements and keep working. So I think that was one of the things. There it is, the IRS, the 990, they want your letter. You always have your annual, if you're a large enough organization to have an annual report, make sure that it's people can get to it. Now, most people put it up on their websites or something. If you don't have an annual report because you're a small group, sometime your year-end statement and some impact activities will suffice. You don't have to do a 15-page corporate report. You can simply talk about the good things that you've done and package it in a way where people can understand it. If it's helping 15 kids plant apples and they planted them and they ate them, show that and talk about that.
And keep in mind that that's a bunch of commonly requested documents. If they're not requested, don't send them.
Don't send them.
Going back to that
can't
point
say that
before.
enough.
So a few more thoughts about basic grant writing and getting help. Participate in the program's explanatory webinars. They're not just helpful for what we talked about yesterday and finding out if a program is useful for you. It's also incredibly helpful for answering a bunch of the questions that you're likely to have about a program. So it's really worth your going over, and if they have been posted on the program's website for you to look at, even if you couldn't make that webinar, go and take a peek and make sure that the answers that other people to the questions others have asked can be useful to you. Again, as Una said earlier, read that request for proposal at least 3 times. And if you still have questions, then call the program staff. There are often resources that are available to help you as you're getting started with your basics of grant writing. Look for resources that are at your disposal already that are easy. Librarians, very, very commonly, a community will have a public library, and very commonly there will be a resource librarian. They're able to help you. I'm told once upon a time doing this workshop, somebody who was working with the development office for a community college said, fundamentally, they've never known a person who worked in one of those positions at a community college or a college or university who didn't want to help somebody who just came in, didn't have to be a alumnus or a faculty member or a student. They were just glad to help. So don't feel shy about asking. Those are the locations you can very commonly find a copy of that directory that I mentioned, the Foundation Center directory that I mentioned yesterday. Another resource is getting some friends and colleagues and other folks to help you review your proposal. If you don't have collaborators who are there to help, find other folks. If you find you have challenges, and some people do, with the www.grants.gov website. Some grants require going through www.grants.gov, some do not. If you have to and you find it a struggle, they do have a dynamite helpline, which is amazingly 24 hours a day, every single day of the year. So that is a great asset. Don't feel shy about using it. And just a few things to let you know, Microfield's Ag Institute itself has some documents to support your grant writing. We have this resource. You would love to have you come and use it. Glad to have you come. And we have on our website basics of what we have covered in this workshop. How to design projects, identify funding prospects, successfully write grants, grant writing do's and don'ts, strategies for writing budgets, electronic submission information, recorded presentations. We also have a program here in the Midwest. I'm sorry to say this does not serve the nation, but we do have a wonderful person, and we scrape money together from every source we can to help people who are putting in proposals or contemplating what kinds of resources would be helpful for them. And we particularly target underserved farmers and other stakeholders or groups helping them. And you can email the email provided here to find out. Our wonderful advisor is Martin Bailke, and he is just a gem. But he also does provide a resource where people can, he will just send out to a list all of the updates as he gets them of programs call for proposals. And we've actually had USDA agencies sign on to our list because they didn't know who else had calls for proposals, and we were a good source. So anybody anywhere can get that by signing up and sending a note to Martin and asking to be on his link. Now, I would like to open this up for some questions, and I'm going to take this off of sharing so we can just look at each other and talk with each other. I would like to ask for a favor for everybody. So if you would be so kind, oh, I'm sorry, I'm just bifocaled and frustrated. There we go. I would welcome if everybody would be kind enough just to use the chat box just a minute. Oh, would I repeat the phone number for grants.gov? Yes, happy to. Give me half a sec. I can run back and do that.
They put in the chat, I think.
Oh, you did? Somebody did?
Somebody
Oh,
already answered it.
you
Yeah,
all too good
800
for
number,
it.
it's there.
I love this
Yeah.
chat. You guys are so good. I just
Yeah,
love
they're
how
quick.
active you are.
They're
Well, I'm going to
quick.
get
I
you to
love
use
it.
the chat again. So here's what I want you to do. We're going to answer your questions, but before we do, I would like to ask you to take a minute, pause, think. The 3 pieces of this workshop: designing sound projects, where do you go to find funding, basics of grant writing. Would you think of one item for each of those that was really important for you to have learned from here and put it in the chat box? And I'm going to just give you a little hint that we're going to apply some of what we learn from the chat box to a pretty special musical performance in very short order. So not just giving it all away, but hoping that you all would use the chat box and again, put in there what 1 or 2 things you've learned in the last couple of days, last 3 days, designing projects, where do you find funding, and basics of grant writing. Put in one thing that was really important to have come away from these workshops with, if you don't mind. So we're just going to sit here and look at this chat box as they come. Using libraries as a resource, great. Pre-submission deadline, important. The checklist you showed this morning, oh, that's great. Glad to hear it. Designing projects, make sure it fulfills funders' needs, great. The format for the outline, using importance of letters of support, excellent.
Timeline, deadline, absolutely.
Checklist again this morning. Designing, the goal is the most important. Funding, match your goal to your funder.
Read everything. There's a booklet for different agencies. Very good.
You like the resource guide? Glad to hear it. In-kind contributions for matching, great.
Don't include things that they didn't ask for.
I love that you're saying don't be discouraged. That's great.
That's great. Yeah.
Yep. Aligning to funders.
Collaborations,
Great.
that's great. Update your website. Please do. That's important. And check those names and spellings.
Yep. Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. This is
Also,
really terrific.
For those of you that just talked about that, also, like you just said, make sure that your links are working, because links will corrupt and break over time. So don't let your website and social media get dusty. Stay fresh.
I love Elena's force yourself to come up with multiple strategies to achieve your goal. I think that's a really great principle in general. I try to apply it when I pull myself into any big challenge.
This was wonderful. Very nice. Thank you.
I'm going to keep looking and reading these, but I just want to invite questions at this point. Are there questions that either have come up that Una, who is so good at using the chat and responding to it, or others, Andrew, Annalena, that you all have seen that we really need to speak to, that anybody wants us to have as common discussion? Keep in mind, again, on the 30th, we're going to have a individual hands-on time available for individual folks as we gather together.
So in the question box, Samantha asked, any tips for new nonprofits that don't have a track record to show? I think that what you then want to show, Samantha, is the strength of the organization and the experience of people that you have there. If you feel that even you're very, very new, be very, very honest and talk about your vision of how you now entering the fray and make things different. Sometimes you want to partner. If you're very new and very small, you might want to go in with someone that has done it before, and you kind of have a training wheels a little bit. So I would say, though, find those strengths that your organization has. And you might want to point out that The reason that you're new is that you saw something missing and now your nonprofit is going to take care of that thing. Keep in mind, your 501c3 is there to operate in the public good, and you must, you're there to make things better. Are letters of introduction required for federal grants? Not all federal grants. I think that, again, we talked about sometimes you might need a letter of intent because the funder wants to narrow down who actually submits, and they want those letters to kind of cull through, and then they'll invite you back. But an introduction letter for federal grants may not help you get in to that grant. But again, grants can be different. I come from both federal and private grants and philanthropy. So sometimes a letter of introduction may help, but I see more letter of intent. So I hope that answered your question, Michael. Please use the chat. Please use the Q&A for questions and not just, I'm looking at both of them. I see them.
Yeah.
Lynn, thank you so much for jumping in and she's been giving out great information that goes right along with what we're saying. So thank you so much, Lynn. You are clearly adept at doing this. It's so nice to have someone online like that.
I have a question that was somebody raised. Gigi asked, when we get a copy of the workshop, will it include us or just the presentation? And I'm not quite clear what you're asking. Can you ask that question again so that I'm clear about what you mean by will it include us? I'm not sure how to answer that yet. Can we talk a little about the difference between letters of support and commitment? Definitely. So a good letter of support fundamentally is a letter of commitment. Now, sometimes programs, and I find increasingly programs ask for a letter of commitment. But if I'm asked to write a letter of support, and I am often, I write more letters of support for people, it seems. And I always make it a letter of commitment if there's anything I'm giving to it. And often I am. And so I work to figure out what role that person wants me to play in the thing that they're putting forward. And I start with my organization and my credentials and what's important for them to know about me and why my word should be significant. And then I go to what is exciting about and the need. I often go directly to the need, what it is that we're about to discuss that's so important. Why do I think it's that important? And I talk about the significance of the opportunity, the work that they're going to be contributing. And then I say what I'm going to contribute to the thing that they're doing. And once again, why it's so important. And if I can monetize that, I do. Sometimes we haven't got to that level of discussion by the time they ask me for a letter of support. It's like, oh, a little early days, I don't know, but I'll tell you in broad terms, this is what I'm committing. But if I do have anything like, we are committing, like there's a grant proposal I put in the fall. That's quite a nuisancey one, truthfully. But I go through and I itemize which part of Michael Fields Ag Institute's staff is going to be doing what, how much of my travel I am going to be donating, how much I'm going to be asking for, how much of my time I'm donating, and I monetize all of that. And I explain in very excruciating detail. That's kind of an unusual one. But the more specific you can be about what you're going to contribute, the better. That's basically the difference. Yes, board members can write letters. It's always a strategic question. Who do you want to have write a letter of support for an organization, for a proposal? I don't always ask everybody and their brother. I ask the people that I think are going to be most strategic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
now your board, and again, that board member question is, it's kind of assumed that they're going to be supportive, but if you've got a strategic alliance with a board member that is doing something that advances the mission, absolutely use it to your advantage.
Yeah,
totally. Anything that you know, but just the fact that he's a board member may or may not be the only marker or moniker that you want to use, but if they're a big employer, if they really can help you do this, I think that would be great.
I love Carrie Yost's comment up here. Be very aware when partnering. Make sure the match is good. If you get the grant, you'll be married to that other partner for the grant. Lesson learned the hard way.
And it is a marriage. And that's also if you're a small group and you're working with the fiscal manager because they've got the credentials and you've got the idea. Make sure you vet and talk honestly with each other before you jump into that relationship.
Yep, absolutely. So William Jr. is asking how many organizations one might be up against in competitive grants. that's a question to find out. I mean, that's one of the things that I think is part of that due diligence when you have a chance, like find out, you can find out from the program officer, program manager, how many people applied last year? How many people got grants? That's a very appropriate question. Really smart
Yeah,
to find out.
last year. Do not call them and ask them how many people are applying this year. They're not
No,
going to know and they're not going
no.
to tell you. But
But
ask on average, how many people have you, how much money have you given out? Or
what's
they
the
should,
percentage?
yeah. So you want to do your homework on that one and
Yeah.
and be informed as you start to write your narrative. Okay, I've got 5 minutes. I need only 3.
Okay, we're getting close. So I just want to introduce you all to somebody who is not just a grant writer. You might think that she has done amazing work and has brought tremendous advice in the last few days, and you'd be right. But there's another side to Ms. Una van Duvall that you don't know. And so she's taking some of those ideas and the things that you said were important from the last few days and is presenting them in a musical form that should be familiar to all of you. And we're hoping that you all will take this song in your head and keep it in your head as you all are writing grants and join us. If we could, we would open up the mics, but this format doesn't allow us to. So we're hoping you're singing along with Una as we are about to enjoy hearing about grant writing.
Okay.
Ms. Una van Duvall, let's get you in the front of all of our
Okay, you
screens.
guys. So the truth is I started out writing grants, as I said, for broke artist groups. So to the tune of When the Saints Come Marching In, here is your grant writing mantra to get you going. Before I start to write a grant, before I start to write a grant, I will think through the project when I want to write a grant. When I design a good project, when I design a good project, I will know my goals and objectives when I design a good project. Once I've designed my project, then I will draft my grant. I will work with my collaborators as I seek funds for my project. Or when I seek those funds, oh, when I seek those funds, the mission and the timeline are compatible. Then I go to seek those funds. Oh, when I start to write a grant, oh, when I start to write that grant, I will read that RFP 3 times before I start to write that grant. Now it is time for you to leave. And when you start those grants you seek, no one else can do it for you. You will see a seed, oh yes, you'll see. Have fun, everybody. We're going to look for you on the 30th and see how many grants you've been writing. We have loved it. Who says grant writing has to be boring? Margaret, back at you.
I love it. You know, you are the best. It's so much fun to work with you. It's been great to work with you, Annalena and Andrew as well. And I have to say, this has been a collaboration. All of our participants. We've had the best participants, we've ever had, with so much exchange back and forth. And you've got a fan club here, my friend.
Thank you. I'll give Annalise my musical website. You guys can be my friends and tell me what other songs you want to hear me sing. I'll put it up later.
That sounds perfect. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Love
Take
it,
care.
you guys. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. We'll stay on and see how many people there. Keep those Mary, I love it. Keep those chats coming. I'm reading.